Hello there. Some of you may be intrigued as to what is inside here and why it's covered over. All will be revealed. Everyone has seen a yin-yang symbol, but few, even among the Chinese, fully understand it. Its deeper meaning was reserved for the elites of ancient Chinese medicine. With time, however, it overspilled into a godless but spirited Chinese form of social being in general. It is like the Star of David for Jews, the crucifix for Christians, or the crescent for Muslims, and perhaps Homer's Iliad for the ancient Greeks. These symbols have deep cultural meanings that over time get taken for granted, but with familiarity and sheer extent fall into a more or less hazy backdrop. A glance at one or another of these contending symbols in the midst of busy lives, however, speaks volumes for those of the given culture. Excuse me. Each encounter is a reminder of the deeper meanings of who you are that cannot be brought into relief without extended reflection through time. Usually, priests are the only ones who know these deeper meanings. They become the guardians of the deeper cultural meanings, and in temples, synagogues, churches and mosques they repeat and say out these meanings to remind their congregations of who they are. Priests are the guardians of cultural identity, and through reminders in prayer, parables, sermons, readings and ritual, they repeat and reinforce cultural identity at regular daily intervals down the centuries. With enough repetition, illusion is substituted for truth. One external archetype, God, and patriarchy of persisting intensity, however, is the resulting norm of our species' adolescence, and we all suffer for it. However, there is one major difference between the yin-yang symbol and symbols like the star, the crucifix, and the crescent. The star, crucifix, and crescent refer to external facts that can be seen with the optical eye. In contrast, the yin-yang symbol refers to the invisible logic of your inner life and mine. It is the means by which concrete facts alone become real. All other symbols are actually parasitic on yin-yang reasoning, abstractions from the concrete basis. The inner logic and meaning of the yin-yang symbol cannot be seen with the optical eye, however, but rather can only be seen with the mind's eye. It can only be known intuitively, and knowing is itself deployed through time. What we see in figure 1, therefore, is more than a fixed image. It represents the active, logical core of inner self-conscious life. The yin-yang symbol, in the yin-yang symbol, dialectic is brought to a halt for convenience in a single externalized depiction. Its active dynamism, however, is preserved in the mind's eye. Its yin-yang logic, the active basis, cannot be seen or known except as something in the inner life of individuals, whether priest, politician, plumber or pauper. Its fact is the passive external symbol of the human body brain. The yin-yang symbol is like no other. Logic and fact. The active and the passive. Motion and stasis. Essence and appearance. The past and the future, each within the other, in each and every pair, can be substituted for yin and yang to indicate the mutual incorporation of all polar opposites, the precise requirement of dialectic, ancient and modern. The yin-yang symbol is a reminder, therefore, of inner meanings that can then be applied to understanding things external to inner life, which then have yin-yang meanings imposed upon them in the external field, but from the inside out. The yin-yang symbol represents the sophisticated but unconscious norms of primordial paganism, now in the cusp here of its modernized realization. Inner life, therefore, and the things of the external field have the invisible yin-yang logic imposed upon them. Knowing is then a process in time, like looking through a telescope, of knowing things, objects, facts and ideas through the restrictions of timeless yet dynamic yin-yang logic, and the same enabling constraints apply in dialectic. This interplay of the fixed and the dynamic is at the core of your inner life and mine, and it couldn't be otherwise. Dialectic is simply yin-yang knowing, being and doing in a modern form. In the modern Western medium we now have in total theory, knowing is an updated version of its ancient Chinese counterpart. In ancient times, however, there were no clocks, let alone time, as we now know it. Evolutionary transitions in social being have made all the difference. Ancient time was experienced as merely qualitative experience. But with time as we now know it, the continuous flow of absolute Newtonian time is divided into hours, seconds, micro and nanoseconds. A mathematician's Shangri-La. Time is quantified and relative time is different again. With time as we now know it, the continuity of human experience is reduced, quantified and transformed from continuous qualitative into discontinuous quantitative yin-yang experience, in which absolute and relative time coincide actively each within the other. There, quality and quantity also coincide each within the other. This is the truth of all experience hitherto, ancient, modern and today. The difference between the ancient and the modern dialectic, therefore, is that whereas the symbol is itself timeless, a mere ontology, in total theory today it can only be fully understood and in and through continuous dialectical transition in time. And since every polar opposition can either be substituted for or superimposed on yin and yang, all that is true all at once. In the self-consciousness of yin-yang knowing, every singular instance of yin and yang draws on all others as the essential backdrop of reality, and in due course this can be demonstrated beyond any doubt. In today's experience, time and timelessness, therefore, which to say motion and stasis, the active and the passive, like up and down, in and out, before and after, black and white, pure opposites one and all, and so on, can all be substituted for or superimposed on yin and yang, and recognized then as the center point of all truth. The yin-yang symbol stands for and symbolizes, therefore, the sum of all polar opposites in a single figure, a circle, a whole split in two, with two dots, one white and the other black. The black dot in white and vice versa is a reminder that neither can be understood except dependently within the other. With or without reminders, however, consciousness would be impossible otherwise. This becomes clearer in up and down, in and out, and so on, through all such pure oppositions. The dots always refer to the opposite of the main segment of the yin-yang symbol. Language itself would be impossible without yin-yang oppositions, and but, as continuity and discontinuity, conjunction and disjunction, verb and noun, as the active and the passive, subject and object, inner and outer, etc. And the same enabling constraints apply in the terms of the newly modernized yin-yang dialectic of total theory. These examples of pure opposites are inseparable each from the other in living practice. Their poles can only be separated each from the other in abstract theory, which is to say, in imagination as theory. In concrete practice, we each and all of us draw endlessly on the inner unified yin-yang resource as required, because dialectic is constitutional to all human being. Without invoking mystical alternatives, there is no place so far for disagreement. But imagination is in time too, and in imagination we can reflect on the yin-yang meaning of things everywhere. We are both active and reflective, practical and theoretical, driven and aspirational, whether we are aware of it or not. It is a basic rule of meaning that the meaning of things like up or down cannot be found either in up or in down. They are terms of relation, and in some the yin-yang symbol refers to the relation of all relations, the polar opposite of individualized universal objectification. In every case, the compound meaning is constant, and it never changes except in degrees of up or down. The meaning of up, therefore, can only be found in the meaning of down, its pure opposite, and vice versa. In dynamic interplay, however, which means that each segment of the yin-yang symbol is the necessary pole of a compound meaning, a compound idea if you prefer. It is an underlying constant across all cultures that never changes. Excuse me once more. We could understand neither pole as up nor down without knowing the meaning of both poles simultaneously. It's what all knowing relies on. This applies to the logic of all polar opposites, and this cannot be said too often. And the meaning of polar opposites, therefore, is in every case an instant of the universal dialectic, the universal constant. Polar opposites are at the center of all meaning, and yin and yang of figure 1 symbolizes all possible instances of them, including generality and particularity, each within the other. That is, the whole and its parts in mutual incorporation. Each pole defines and delimits the meaning of the other, and it couldn't be otherwise. There is one more feature that is significant, and it calls upon your active imagination. Imagine two things for a bit. Imagine that the yin-yang symbol in figure 1 is further rotated until it is edge on. Since both the line separating the past from the future and the symbol are each of 0 thickness in a flat, two-dimensional timeless plane, ontology, all you then could see with the merely optical eye is a line separating the dark past from the bright future. This too can be reversed. The future might be dark and the past a bright and lovely thing. Joy emerges from the experience of suffering, and vice versa, in every case. But the line you now see in your imaginary figure 2 is deceptive. It doesn't actually exist. in the way trees, mice, mammals and mountains exist. The origin of the line is imagination. Through the medium of our inner life, we impose it on the external field for our convenience, as in Greek geometry. But the line is not unique in this regard. What applies to the line applies equally to time, to space even, to number and mathematics in general, to architecture, prose and poetry, and everything else, including language itself. The internal dominates the external. Like good primitive pagans, we forget that what we see in the external field is the product of 10,000 generations of self-conscious human being distilling the material and social world into agreed terms of reference. Agreement among our forebears about the nature of this humanly assembled array in the external field produced the world we know. This is what transforms the world into a thoroughly humanized experience. Here, in total theory, the same applies in the next step in the evolution of human self-consciousness. It applies to the modernized yin-yang symbol and to all that follows from it as the constitutional dialectic that until now was a mere shadow in the background of all human being. The line in figures 1 and 2 is our invention. It does not exist. It does not exist independently in the external field. It exists dependently as something of our a priori inner life, and it helps the modern imagination at every turn. Indeed, the imagination of today's experience would be impossible otherwise. The shadow was the shadow of an underlying reality barely known except in ancient China. In total theory, however, reality has become concrete as never before. It signals a new phase in human development. The critical difference between the ancient and the modern yin-yang dialectic, therefore, is knowing the transitional concrete experience of time through the timeless constant of yin and yang, inevitably in a world far removed from ancient origins, new polar oppositions undreamed of in the Chinese Book of Changes, 700 BCE, are now a concrete feature of life today. Quality and quantity, space and time, subatomic energy and mass, the invisible and the visible, the latencies of our previously invisible DNA, and so on, being examples that now must be taken into account. But this is to shift away from the rotated yin-yang symbol itself. In the imagination of the mind's eye, the rotated symbol as figure 1 is still there, but edge on. It is invisible in imagination, however. It is invisible in imagination, however. You know intimately that nothing has changed, except the rotation. It means that in an imaginary figure 2, all you know is that through the line of zero thickness, continuity in other words, the yin-yang past seamlessly becomes the future, and vice versa. The yin-yang logic remains unchanged, but is invisible. This captures the dilemma of dialectic perfectly. It is invisible. Dialectic can only be seen as in the imaginary figure 2 with the mind's eye. The meaning of the yin-yang symbol is invisible as the basis of all possible knowing, but is as real as before the rotation took place. The logic of dialectic, likewise, is invisible but real in the inner life of every individual. By demonstration yet to come, it is the basis of all self-consciousness and consciousness could not have arisen otherwise. See the moving hand at my website. Comparatively few books have been written directly about the dialectic in the modern period, let alone about the universal constitutional dialectic. Of the latter, there are almost none. During some 300 years to the present, however, excepting Spinoza through George Hegel, Adorno and Jameson, mainstream scholarship effectively ignores the dialectic and remains mesmerized by the objectified, merely empirical passing but evolving facts of the external field. In the norms of priesthood and mainstream scholarship, it is as if all we need to know is what is external to inner life and the dominance of the inner by the outer. Empiricism as first portrayed in the book of Genesis. You have thus been robbed of the necessary a priori truth of your inner life by our Western guardians of truth. In the West, you, we and me too, have been robbed of your inner life by an evolved cultural education that ignores the inner real basis of human being. You have been robbed by the unseemly, outdated loyalties of mainstream scholarship to the Star of David, the external hypnosis of the crucifix and the crescent, and every other symbol of mere externality there may be. Their modern counterpart is empiricism. The external dominates the internal. The yin-yang symbol is the exception that proves the rule. Here, in Total Theory, a shortcut to understanding your evolving inner life is brought into relief. And my crude drawing of the yin-yang symbol is at least a help. There's much, much more to say of it. To get the full meaning of the constitutional dialectic in Total Theory, however, the individual must use her yin-yang imagination and let her dialectical imagination roam beyond the limits suggested by me at any given point. In the domain of concrete imagination, the ancient and the modern are condensed to the actual terms of your dynamic inner competence that is there in the passing present of every individual, but is overlaid by the external fantasies of the star, the crucifix and the crescent, to say little of national flags and emblems. The externalized past that has dominated and dominates yet the inner life of Western civilization today, in a word or two, outmoded adolescent tradition. It is time to grow up. Total Theory is the emergent, evolving reaction to the past, in which nothing is lost but error. In fact, it is demonstrable that the constitutional dialectic is active in the inner life of us all. It liberates us, if we wish it, from all ancient dogma, and in those who get it, a new individual arises. It is a journey that, at least in part, I have already taken, and of course I couldn't share it with you otherwise, but my efforts are secondary. Your liberated future as the new individual of the future is the whole point. Its basis is the modernized, updated version of yin-yang dialectic portrayed in Figure 1 in the first and second part of this introduction to the constitutional dialectic of Total Theory. It produces in the new individual a new synthesis through which the individual can see with the mind's eye the emerging conditions of the adolescent past, extending into the future of our yet unachieved species maturity. In the West, we have been robbed of what makes us fully human, and it cannot any longer be tolerated. The love story, has begun in earnest. See you in part 4.
Open your eyes, look up to the skies and see.